most Americans have been, I don't want to say brainwashed, they've been indoctrinated.
It's a con job on the public. They're manipulating public opinion. And
in the United States, we have a number of event horizons that we're facing, and they're not all pleasant.
Insurrection Act of 1807 will allow him to send 1,500 troops in Alaska, and they're all on standby to come here.
You're just one line away from martial law.
I had to shout out and say, look, you guys are arranging a charade here.
In many respects, you guys going into secret fighting.
If you get into things like covering up 9/11, if you get into things like teaching Cubans to torture one another, your principles erode.
You're witnessing something happening in America now that's not just different, it's actually quite dangerous.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. This is a Covert Action webinar. These webinars help us keep the lights on and continue doing the good work that we do. We are so honored to have our guest speakers here tonight. We have Ray McGovern, Thomas Drake, Coleen Rowley, and Jeremy Kuzmarov. They are each going to be giving an in-depth analysis into current events. Now, tonight's discussion, we are going to be examining the uneasy and often hidden relationships between presidential power and the intelligence agencies, as well as U.S. intervention abroad and how all of those intersect. Now, we're specifically looking at, under the Trump administration, these long-standing tensions between the White House and the intelligence community, and how it was moved into public view during the Russiagate scenario and all of that took place. Now, those conflicts, they did not begin there nor end there. And we are going to be having firsthand accounts from whistleblowers, former intelligence officials, and looking into these events beyond the personalities and diving into the deeper structures of power, secrecy, and accountability that shapes U.S. foreign policy. So a very deep discussion here tonight. Ray, you served 7 U.S. presidents and helped prepare the president's daily briefs. That is fascinating. Now, we are 1 year into Trump's presidency, and I want to hear, our audience would like to know here, what do you recognize immediately as a continuation? Is there a continuation of these intel agencies and the conflict between the presidency? Is there, institutional resistance to Trump's authority? How do you see things shaping up? And what's different in this administration? Ray, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Kayla. Well, I would say that this is the second go-around for Trump. The first go-around, the intelligence agencies, including the Department of Justice and the FBI, did him in. Now he has the proof that they did him in. The idea was Russiagate, smear him. First, try to prevent him from becoming president, and secondly, to sabotage him. I would say emasculate him to the degree he ever wanted to reach out to Russia. Why is that important? Well, it's of extreme importance because most Americans have been, I don't want to say brainwashed, they've been indoctrinated into believing that Putin and every Russian official is evil incarnate. That has consequences. Now, this time around, well, he permitted Tulsi Gabbard, as National Intelligence Director, to put out the proof of all this sabotage. That was pretty gutsy, wasn't it? And she did, with a vengeance. And she named people and deprived them of clearances. And so it looked like things were going pretty well. And then all of a sudden we get more evidence of incompetence or derangement when James Comey, for God's sake, when Coleen can talk more about James Comey. Oh, yeah, they got him finally. He's indicted. Right? And so Trump appoints some insurance lawyer who's very pretty but doesn't have many other assets or capabilities, and she screws it up so it looks like James Comey might walk. Why I mention all this is because I'm looking on from the Kremlin. Say I'm Vladimir Putin, and I'm saying, huh, this guy Trump, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he's sincere. Can he actually do anything? And more, they're getting the idea, well, hello, here he is talking to us, and some of his people may be trying to kill me, Putin. Maybe sending 91 drones with technology supplied by NATO, if not the U.S. itself. So can I trust this guy? Now, it will all come to a head now because Putin has to receive an answer to his 22 September, count the months, overture for his personal plea in this big formal setting at his National Security Council session, saying, look, Mr. Trump, we would like to extend the quantitative limitations of the New START treaty, the only arms control treaty left in force. And remember, Mr. Trump, it expires on February 5. Uh, Look, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is say, look, we'll keep those limitations. There are the 1,550 warheads in operation. Okay, we'll keep those limitations for one more year after the 5th of February. Now, what has Trump said about that? Well, a journalist asked him 2 weeks after he took power, or two weeks after September 22nd, when Putin made this overture. She asked him, well, what do you think about that? And Trump said, oh, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a good idea to me. Now, the Russians have been imploring the U.S. for an official response. None has come. So we get 2 weeks, okay? And for 2 weeks, the Kremlin will be looking on to say, well, now the deep state, enfolded as it is with the military-industrial complex, will they be able to have sway here and prevent Trump from doing this very simple thing? We don't have to negotiate. All he has to say yes or no. Yeah, we'll keep those limits on. Can he not even do that? And that will be the litmus test, it seems to me, because if Trump can't do that kind of simple thing, which would be very easy to say yes or no, if he can't even give an answer, well, Putin and the Russians and the Chinese, everyone else will be forced to conclude that, look, this guy's not his own man, and we'll try to prevent him from doing something really stupid that could lead to a nuclear war. But there's not real hope that we can advance U.S.-Russian relations very quickly anytime soon. Maybe I'll end with that.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to ask you one more follow-up question based on your life experience. So you were in the White House briefing the presidents on high-level intelligence, right? So how does the CIA inform the president? I mean, how big of a role does the CIA have in the decisions that the president is making on a daily basis?
Well, I wasn't in the White House every day. It was 3 mornings a week.
Excuse me, 3 mornings a week. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We produced the president's daily brief, and I had a colleague. We were a team. I did it 3 days. He did it the 3 other days. Now, it all depends on the president, is the answer to your question. Nixon, well, we didn't have any direct access to Nixon. He didn't like us. We'd give it to Kissinger, and Kissinger would take it and he'd mark it all up. He'd tear this page off. What he gave to Nick, what he gave to President Nixon was what he thought Nixon needed to know. Not this turgid prose, just this marginality and all that stuff. We never really had direct personal access to the president until Ronald Reagan was elected. I'll tell you this story here. Two of my colleagues went over to Pacific Palisades, showed up one morning, and with all the Secret Service and people on it, CIA briefers, morning briefers, CIA. We don't have any notice of this. What's going on with CIA brief? Reagan comes down in his bathrobe. He said, "What's going on here?" CIA briefing. Oh, come on in. They went in, they had breakfast, and Reagan loved it. And so that team, the original team, briefed him every morning before, while he was president-elect. When they came to Washington, George Bush, who knew this was going on, his vice president, George H.W. Bush, says to the president, now that we're in Washington now, I'd really like to get the briefing too, and probably Secretary of State, Secretary, but so when would you like to hold it? I would like to do it first thing in the morning. And Reagan said, um, hmm, how about you guys doing it first thing in the morning, and then you come to me at 11:30 and tell me what I should worry about. Okay, so that's how it came out. We very seldom had personal access to Reagan, but it was the next best thing. And in some respects, it was a better thing because Schultz, Weinberger, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the vice president, and a whole series of national security advisors, some of whom ended up in jail. They were given the same treatment with additional overnight information such as we would choose. So Reagan, by 11:30, they would be prepared to fight their causes, and Reagan would be prepared to entertain what was going on. So, long story short, that was the personal approach, okay? It was one-on-one. We were serious, experienced analysts, and we did the best we could to tell the truth. Now, that became a little bit tarnished when George Tenet, the director of Central Intelligence, decided that to get more face time with George W. Bush, that he would ride together with the briefer downtown in the morning, just to be there and look over the briefer's shoulder and get some face time with you. So it gradually deteriorated. I don't know what's the situation now, but I'm told, actually just from the press, most of my colleagues, as my 97-year-old grandmother used to say, they're all dead now. So all I get is from the press here that he has real difficulty reading more than a paragraph. CIA substantive people, I'll end with this, the analysts, the ones that at least should be empowered to tell the truth, they've been shut out. Witness what's happened in Venezuela, what's happened in Iran, what's happening now with respect to Greenland. My God, they're not consulting the analysts. This is a very long story going back to the Bay of Pigs and John Kennedy. I can tell that story later, but I'm hogging the time now. So thanks very much.
Not a problem. Thank you so much for your insights, Ray. You guys, this is like inside baseball, okay? Like what is going on behind the scenes. So we appreciate your insights so much. We're going to move to our next speaker here. I would love to introduce to you guys Thomas Drake. He is the NSA whistleblower in regards to, and he was a target of the Espionage Act. Now, Thomas, you witnessed the surveillance state expanding from the inside. You paid an incredibly personal price for challenging it. And we all owe you a deep sense of gratitude for your service in blowing the whistle and educating the public on what was going on behind the scenes. Now, let's bring it to now. Under Trump, do you believe that the intelligence apparatus has changed at all? Has it become more entrenched, less accountable, more dangerous? Are we losing even more of our rights? Where are we at from today? Give us some insights on that.
Well, to answer you directly without providing you, any more of my background, because I don't think it's that's well known. You all have to do is do a search on my name. For me right now, history is just ringing in my ear with all the kinds of alarm bells going off. And I think we're experiencing a very dangerous moment in both US and global history. And we're seeing intelligence agencies increasingly, I have to say, it's increasingly captured and politicized by the Trump administration. For all the talk about drain the swamp, clean out the deep state, if anything, there's, and I'll use sort of the replacement theory when it comes to intelligence, is he's made it clear that if you depart from, and this is a lot of those who work for him, you don't have a voice at all. So we're seeing the erosion of oversight even more than even when I was in, and it was pretty bad, or what I call undersight. And now, especially with front page news and him headed to Davos, we're seeing an extraordinary rise, which is like, it's like a throwback to the 19th century. It's like, wait a minute, all these imperialistic ambitions, and this is, I believe, is creating risk, not just to America, but from America, both at home and abroad. And I think it's really important what the public, and I say public at large, sort of we the people public, intelligence agencies in the post 9/11 world, I call the national security world, are increasingly serving imperial expansion needs, not now actual national security, contrary to the preamble of the Constitution, providing for the common defense in which national security would fall under. So if any assessments, and I have a couple examples I can share with you in my 10 minutes, any assessments that contradict political objectives, which are driven in many cases simply by the appetites of Trump, his personal appetites, his personal coveting, his personal wants, those are ignored, or the analysts are fired or just set aside. The other thing to understand is that covert operations, which have been going on for decades, and I did work for a time at the CIA. Covert operations are unconstrained by any meaningful oversight. There's already pretty poor oversight because most all the committees, both the standing committees that came out of all the scandals of the 70s, which was my decade of my own personal civic awakening, covert operations are incredibly unconstrained. He's not even briefing, as it turns out. He's not even briefing sort of the big eight. And the president has enormous powers, even more so than even 20 or 30 years ago. But he can just authorize lethal operations in any country with a single finding. So Congress gets no briefing or very limited briefing, or it's all filtered. Courts have no authority to review. And intelligence professionals, as I know all too well, and others, particularly whistleblowers, if you try to expose any of this abuse, if you try to expose any of the government in secret going way past the guardrails, well, you are more than just entertaining career destruction. Here's the other thing that's emerging. You're talking about like present day, even more so than before. This is where we get into sort of the theory of empires in terms of human history. But economic warfare in all of its various guises and stripes is becoming a tool. And tariffs on NATO allies or threats, tariffs across the world, they're being used. This is all in the open. This is not even, there's no pretense here, are being used to coerce political outcomes. Current example, pressuring Denmark to surrender territory. And if they don't surrender it, we're just going to take it. That's not trade policy. That's just raw coercion with the threat of a gunboat, right? Or a brigade dropping in on the largest island in the world of about 55,000 plus people who definitely do not want America in Greenland. Threats have been issued to Iran. They are bombed Iran here last year. We've got the current situation in Greenland. Cuba has been threatened. Colombia has been threatened. Mexico has been threatened. And I just have to say this. I think it was yesterday or the day before, Trump actually had a map of what I can only call Pax Americana. U.S. is a super state, showing a map with Canada, Venezuela, and Greenland as U.S. territories. And I'm going to be very blunt here. My view on history is pretty cynical, but Trump's turning into an imperial wannabe emperor. He really is. He's in utter violation of his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. He's engaged in massive vanity projects. And he's saying that taking Greenland is psychologically important for him to own. Wow. So, and then you have to understand this is not just bad policy or partisan politics. It goes way beyond that. What you're actually seeing is the systematic dismantling of constitutional democracy in service to authoritarian power. So when intelligence agencies are co-opted and captured, when covert operations are unconstrained, when democratic oversight is totally eroded, and then you dress up imperial ambition in security language, you're witnessing something happening in America now that's not just different, it's actually quite dangerous. But the machinery behind all this is not mysterious. Because the intelligence community has been reorganized and increasingly for political control. It's being weaponized to engage in all of our overseas operations. And it's used to justify extraordinary expansion of American power globally, both behind the scenes and what you're seeing on the front page news. This machinery is fully operational. You saw it completely deployed in Venezuela. We literally, no matter what you think of Maduro, we kidnapped a sitting head of state. So, and again, Trump and his people are threatening, other countries. So it's not what, if you think you might be overreacting, you're not. I think it's important that something fundamentally, even in terms of post-World War II, is shifting. And I think that the U.S. and the world are facing a number of event horizons across the globe. Now, Venezuela. To me, this is actually a Rubicon in part because you can see just in the Trump's tone and what he's saying publicly is that he now is like emboldened because he was able in a half hour take out the head of state. But if you look at the actual what's left behind in Venezuela, not much has changed. But in essence, is forcing, remember, the last thing you say is Venezuela is a democratic country. But what he wants is what he said he wanted, which is he wanted access to the oil. So now he's claiming that he's going internally through them to go after, narco terrorists. But it was a kidnapping of a head of state. We haven't even done anything like that. Even in America, we've done all kinds of other things since Panama. And then it's important to note, back to intelligence. The intelligence community is, they call it, it's not really a community because they each have their own issues with each other and ambitions. But the intelligence community actually produced an assessment that contradicted Trump's claims about Maduro. When the assessment was reaffirmed, guess what happened? To me, this is telling. The acting director of the National Intelligence Council was fired. This is what actually happens when intelligence is completely politicized. Dissent is punished and absolute loyalty is demanded. Now all those threats are stretching beyond, and there's already reports coming out about surreptitious attempts to gain access to information even about Greenland just in case we have to go in. Remember, people are saying, oh, it's just rhetoric. It's just Trump spouting off. Nope. To me, this is the resurrection of imperial ambition. It is this weird revival of the Monroe Doctrine, and it's an extraordinarily dangerous expansion of executive power.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for that analysis, Thomas. And we will get into it a little bit later into our group discussion, but those insights are incredibly important. So thank you so much for that. Okay, we're gonna hear from our next speaker, and I don't want to cut you off, Thomas. It's just I'm watching the clock here, and I understand. Yeah, thank you so much. So next is our speaker, Coleen Rowley, FBI whistleblower, and Coleen, after exposing the pre-9/11 intelligence failures, you saw firsthand how institutions protect themselves, and under Trump, I mean, obviously Drake's analysis here is not too hopeful, but Trump said he was wanting to go after the deep state. He was wanting to go after these intel agencies. So do you see any reform attempts to the FBI, or did the FBI and DOJ just revert to these, an institutional self-preservation and weaponization of these institutions? What's your analysis on that?
Well, I think the answer is probably more complicated than 10 minutes. But here's what I think. 9/11 changed everything. So that's before I became a whistleblower. And I didn't know, I thought probably Mueller, of course, he was just brand new, only 2 weeks in before 9/11 happened. And so it's a natural reflex to want to cover up the mistakes that led to 3,000 people dying. Of course, it's natural. You and I in those positions probably would not want to go out in front of the public and say, we could have prevented 9/11 if we had just shared some information. I mean, can you imagine how politically, that would have played? So of course he lied. He goes out and he says, we couldn't have done anything to prevent 9/11. Meanwhile, all those memos that are now in the 9/11 Commission report, to the chapter is called "The System is Blinking Red." Tenet and others, Richard Clark, their hair is on fire. They know there's going to be an attack. And guess who the attack is coming from? It's coming from their old source, and the Mujahideen that we funded and armed, because the United States often uses terrorist proxy forces. Al-Qaeda was a terrorist proxy force. They've used ISIS later on. They're using neo-Nazis in Ukraine. This is a common, as Tom said, these CIA covert actions. If the public knew that they're told that we're fighting against terrorists, and actually, no, we're on the side of the terrorists. And actually, there are some intelligence briefings that say that. They say we've got, even Petraeus said that at one point, we've got to use ISIS. And now he's hugging Jolani, who is the former ISIS leader, who's now installed into Syria, and Petraeus is hugging him. Well, it's not a surprise, because Petraeus actually said, we've got to use ISIS. So none of this is, palatable to be told to the public, and especially after a terrible catastrophe. But what you have after a terrible catastrophe is what Rahm Emanuel, and you know what? Rahm Emanuel is speaking for many people. The notion is never let a catastrophe go to waste. Now, most people would say, oh my gosh, 3,000 people died. But the group of people in the Bush administration after 9/11, a lot of them were, frankly, and especially the Israelis, were overjoyed. They were overjoyed about 9/11 because that project for the new American century that had planned, when we get the so-called new Pearl Harbor, when we get the new Pearl Harbor, then we will be able to launch the series of wars to change the Mideast to our favor. Of course, Wesley Clark later on revealed this. So it was used, 9/11. So when Mueller went out and said, we couldn't have done anything to prevent 9/11, even though there was memos, unbelievable. I don't have time for it. But when he did this, he was also allowing a new narrative to be used, this pretext for the war on terrorism, which became an actual war on all of the Mideast. Now, you didn't get the 9/11 Commission. I know Ray McGovern criticized it a lot. You can criticize it, didn't go far enough. 2 of the FBI agents assigned to the CIA were still told to lie. They were told they had to lie because they knew that some of the hijackers had come into California, and they weren't allowed to say that they couldn't tell the FBI about it. So you go far along before some of those lies get debunked and revealed. But going back to the 9/11 Commission and the Joint Intelligence Committee, later 28 pages blacked out from this, etc. But at least some bits were in there. and some of the fixes for how 9/11 had happened. The main one was just reading, Ray talked about briefing these important officials. Well, in the FBI, no one even read the memos. Afterwards, they had memos saying bin Laden is entwined with the Chechen leader. They claim they never read the memo. Their names are on it. Okay, so if you wanted to fix the so-called intelligence, it's very easy. You didn't need to probably kill 5 million people through the Mideast and take over the governments. You probably needed to give an order to all of the officials. When their name is on the memo, they have to read it. I mean, very simple. But no one would tell anyone that. It's actually in the 9/11 Commission. The sharing of information is the '1 problem. They didn't share information. It could have been easily fixed. Now, right after, well, maybe after the 3 years later, they did for a while start sharing information better between agencies. But what you had happen then is Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning, low level in Iraq, who got to see some of this top intelligence, and he decided to take it to WikiLeaks. Guess what that did? Then we went right back to clamp down secrecy, go after leakers, put them in prison for the rest of their life, like they did with Manning and Daniel Ellsberg. Right now, I hate to fast forward here, but Bondi, they just searched a Washington Post reporter and got 1,000 sources in the federal government and probably in the intelligence agencies' identities. By the way, this is highly illegal to launch a raid. This violates the First Amendment, violates freedom of press, of course. But this is a way to catch all people in government. And of course, it's like Tom, it's like all of us that we want the truth to come out. So if you want the truth to come out, which would be a fix to 9/11, right? That would be a fix of it. We know sharing the info. In fact, by the way, I know I'll probably go over my time here, but instead of just saying sharing information with agencies, the 9/11 Commission, to its credit, went a step further. And they said the information should have been shared with the public. Where does the FBI get its information to solve Ponzi schemes, anything in the world? It gets it from the public. There's no way that this stuff comes down from heaven into an FBI agent's head. Maybe we see that on TV, but that doesn't exist in real life. And if they said if the information had been shared with the public right off the bat, 9/11 would have been fixed. So unfortunately, I'm just going to close here with saying I do agree with Tom. And when Ray mentioned the second go around, I'm going to say this is unprecedented. A president has one term, then a 4-year gap where there's a whole series of chaos and that former president is charged with crimes, etc. During the first term, he was definitely attacked. Russiagate is all lies. You had Comey, Brennan, Clapper, all making up things from probably Hillary Clinton, so it was a partisan thing. In my opinion, they created a monster because Trump now, that precedent that was set in the first term, you can lie on FISAs, about people, you can make up an entire hoax, a Russiagate hoax, you can make up the entire thing. So when Trump finally gets power again, 4 years later, what do you think he's going to do? He's going to say, they did it to me, I'm going to do it to them. And I think that imperial presidency and also the lawlessness, I hope I'll get another chance to talk about this, but right now it's created a system of not following any semblance of law, including genocide, including shooting people in Minnesota. I mean, it's unbelievable what's gone on now.
Absolutely. And we will get into it further, but thank you so much for your analysis on this. And I do have a follow-up question briefly in regards to, I don't know if you've ever heard of this group called the Suspendables. Are you familiar with them? Oh, well, it's a bunch of, FBI dissidents and they created how to reform the FBI, right? And when Kash Patel got into the office or to be the FBI director, they gave it to him. Nothing's been done. So,
I'm
yeah.
a little embarrassed because I kind of thought Kash Patel's promises to reform the FBI. And one of the things was to decentralize power out of Washington. Another thing was, turn the FBI headquarters into a museum and then decentralize power. He actually had some good suggestions. None of it, to my knowledge, has been happened at all.
Nothing.
In fact, he's flying on the FBI jet to see his young girlfriend, and unfortunately, I don't see too much hope in Kash Patel.
Gosh, I'm on the same page with you there. Well, thank you so much, Coleen. We'll come back to you in a bit. Now, for our final panelist here, we have our dear editor, Jeremy Kuzmarov of CovertAction Magazine. But before I introduce him, I have to say this to you all. We have a chat, or in the chat, there is a link to our fundraiser. This is a part of our winter fundraiser. And if anyone would like to donate, please feel free to click on that link. It's much appreciated. It helps us fund these events, do these webinars, and we're trying to get some journalists into the field this summer to actually do independent investigations. So any support is much appreciated, and that link is in the chat. So with that being said, let's go to Jeremy. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate everything you do for us here at Covert Action. I have a leading question for you here because Jeremy specializes in the history of all this, right? And that's why we love his articles so much, because he always provides a historical context to what's going on right now. And it's so valuable. So historically, Jeremy, in regards to the intelligence agencies and media collaborations to manufacture this consent for intervention, specifically in Venezuela, I mean, we've seen a huge amount of support from people on the right saying, go get them, all the things, even though we're breaking international law and causing all kinds of chaos internationally. So let's talk about the historical perspective of how does Venezuela, fit into this long pattern of covert and overt regime change operations.
Okay, well, thank you, Kayla, and thanks to the other guests. Those were great insights from all of them. Well, first, if I can address a point, I think we should bring to the equation the issue of political economy, and related to what Thomas Drake is saying, the slide toward authoritarianism, naked imperialism, and fascism. We have to look at political economy. I mean, if you study European history in the 30s, you have to look at the big corporations who were behind, Hitler and the rise of fascism. And there was a good article in the New York Times on January 15th. I cut it out, and it's how post-election donors have benefited in second term. So you have to look at who's benefiting from these policy that Thomas and others are describing. And there were some. Well, and this is a good article. It has good information about the Palantirs, the BlackRocks, and the others. Of course, they're funding both parties, but Trump is more naked imperialism, as Thomas was pointing out. And then there was a report in Common Dreams about this guy, Paul Singer. He's a billionaire, and he actually in November bought, and he's a big time Trump donor, millions of dollars into the Trump campaign and the GOP. And he actually bought into the Venezuelan state oil company in November, just a month and a half before what Thomas described, the kidnapping of a legally elected president and a naked imperial activity that killed at least 100 people, including a lot of Cubans. And they're pretty open in their rhetoric that they want to take control of Venezuela's oil. John Kiriakou had a very good article in CovertAction Magazine talking about the connection with Iran, because he was saying in the article that if they achieve their ambitions in Venezuela and take charge of the oil there, the Straits of Hormuz is less important, because I think they're worried if they attack Iran, that Iran could cut off the oil supply in the Straits of Hormuz, the retaliation. A lot of the Western oil supply goes through the Straits of Hormuz, but if they have control over Venezuela's oil, that's less of a concern. I think that was Kiriakou's argument, if I'm not mistaken. So, and yeah, I mean that was Philip Agee. You know, Covert Action Magazine was founded by Philip Agee, who not only exposed the crimes of U.S. intelligence agencies and their treason, uh, but also pointed to the influence of multinational corporations in driving their agenda. And yeah, I think they've eviscerated, and you know, it's these corporations also. If you look at Congress, I think Thomas made an important point that these, you know, after the Church Committee hearing, which was an important hearing to expose a lot of abuses of the CIA, and it led to a period of reform or attempted reform of the intelligence agencies, and it set up these watchdog committees in Congress, but those committees over time have been totally co-opted. Uh, and that's something we have covered at Covert Action Magazine. It's not being covered in a lot of the alternative media, but it is very significant in the destruction of democracy. And that also relates to funding. You have to look at who's funding those politicians who are getting on those committees, and they're being funded by these same interests that profit off these wars and regime change operations, like we're seeing kind of now on steroids. So yeah, I think people have to yeah, ground it in political economy, and not only do we need reform of our intelligence agency, but we need to reform the entire political structure. And the capture of big money over politics is what is, I think, dooming us. And Trump is an instrument of that. And I think, yeah, he packaged himself. I think that was political theater that the Democrats fed into, as the other people like Ray have pointed out. The Russiagate and Coleen was a complete farce. It was driven in part by partisan agenda. It was driven also by the intelligence agencies and their desire to create this Russophobia and hatred toward Russia. I think it targeted the liberal classes because it knew the deep state, so to speak, know that those, you know, it's the liberal elements that could come out and oppose wars, that a traditional, you know, anti-war movement come more from the left. So with the Russiagate and this anti-Russia fervor we've been living for the last decade, it's targeted the liberal media, it's targeted academia, and the worst Russophobia and McCarthyism is there on these pseudo left-wing outlets. But
Yeah,
I
and
think Trump
Jeremy,
that
if
fed
I
into, yeah,
could
and
hop in
just to
real
finish my
quick.
point
Oh,
about
yeah,
the
go
deep
ahead.
state, yeah, that Trump was able to seize on that to make like he was a victim of the deep state, and he's advanced that theme in so many different ways. But really, he is the deep state. You know, the deep state, and I wrote out a definition. I would define it as the intelligence agencies and financial oligarchy that they serve. And he is their greatest instrument. He's advancing these extreme right-wing policy that benefit that oligarchy. And you know, they're different things, like the JFK. You know, he is a smart, savvy politician, and the people around him. You know, and he created this image, like with the JFK, that he was going to release the JFK files, so he's taking on the deep state. But then the file they released has most of them have nothing to do with the JFK assassination, and it's already been. We had a webinar a month ago. It's basically been solved that Lyndon Johnson, Texas oil barons, and renegade CIA people were behind that coup. So it's already solved, but basically, but so that's just part of his image he's trying to project. And I think the same with Kash Patel. If you look at his record, he's serving it. You know, he wrote this book about how he's taking on the deep state. You know, before he was FBI director, and it's just like it's a con job on the public because the public has turned against these agencies. The public knows something wrong, but they're manipulating public opinion. And Kash Patel, I had, you know, if you look at his record, one thing he's doing, they're really going after Chinese scientists now. I think that's one of the ominous thing that's going on. They're prosecuting graduate students and Chinese scientists. That's one thing the FBI is doing, and it's reminiscent of the McCarthy era. They're ruining careers, and they're advancing the xenophobia in society to build public support for war with China. And there's all kinds of other nefarious things Kash Patel is doing, including, I would say, covering up the Charlie Kirk assassination, but we won't up in that kind of worms now. So go ahead. What was your question?
Well, you answered it. I was going to ask you to give our audience some examples, excuse me, of what that looks like. Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, other points I had, because I prepared a brief talk. Yeah, I think Trump doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the political economy. It's to capture a big money interest in the political system, and he's their perfect instrument. He's advancing an extreme right-wing agenda. I think that was the goal of the CIA for many, many years. And in fact, I think Willie Casey said it. He said not only is our job is to make sure that, when the American public believes everything that is a lie, then we've done our job. And he also said, we're going to turn this country so far to it wasn't Casey, but somebody else in the CIA said in the 60s, we're going to turn this country so far to the right, you won't know what happened. And that's what's been going on. And we've done a lot of important articles. Hopefully people will read them in CovertAction Magazine. Like one, we looked at how the CIA infiltrated the left-wing groups in the 60s. That was an important movement that was moving America in a more progressive direction, opposing the Vietnam War. And then we had an article, for instance, how the CIA created these far left radical offshoots like the Symbionese Liberation Army to discredit the left, to make it look like the hippies and anti-war people were dangerous extremists and terrorists and wanted to kill police and that kind of thing, which wasn't true of most of the people in those movements. And the Symbionese Liberation Army kidnapped Patty Hearst, and they just like it was this violent nihilistic activity designed to discredit the movements of the left out of California and the counterculture. So that's just one example of an operation the CIA was running to discredit the left. And that's how we have the far right dominating. It's what Chris Hedges wrote, The Death of the Liberal Class, the death of the left. That occurred slowly also in the McCarthyism. It destroyed left-wing organizations and movements that existed and were very prominent in early 20th century America. Because I teach American history, we cover the Socialist Party, the populist movement. These were strong movements in the heartland of America. They had strong anti-war views, supported egalitarianism, countering the power of Wall Street. These movements were all destroyed in the McCarthy period, and then you have the 60s movements, and the CIA infiltrated those to destroy them. So that's important to understand how we got to today, because we don't have a functioning left. They channeled all the left into identity politics and to single issues. We don't have a left-wing movement that could push back against this right-wing move toward fascism that Thomas Drake was describing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your insights and helping our audience understand the history of that and to be able to identify some of these covert operations. I think your example of Trump, connecting himself to the JFK files and being about truth and then nothing coming from it is a really incredible example. I do see a question here. So what I will say to our audience here, if you guys do have questions but don't want to raise your hand and ask, you can throw your questions into the chat and we will read through them at the end. So that's another option for you guys to get your questions out to our panelists. I see here we have Lou Wolf. So good to see you, Lou. He's one of the original members of CovertAction Magazine. And while people are filling back up in the room, I'll talk a little bit about the history. It was founded by the first ever CIA whistleblower, Philip Agee. And his son, Chris Agee, is continuing the legacy of the newspaper. And we do our very best to highlight the intelligence agencies and the covert actions that are going on. And one thing that I think is really unique about covert action is we do a lot of international coverage, which is really lacking in this day and age in the media landscape. And so I'm so appreciative for all of our journalists who we have journalists all over the world that send us the most amazing information and articles. And if you guys do want to get involved, if you're a writer, if you make content, please reach out to us. We are always looking for new voices and we would love to be able to feature some of your guys' work. So with that being said, I think everyone is back in action here. we are going to open up our group discussion. And this is going to be about 35, 40 minutes here. Now, we've heard from each of our speakers individually, and I want to open up the floor to be able to connect the dots. And so these are some core questions for our speakers here, and I'm going to just open it up. Whoever wants to hop in, hop in. So the first question I have for our panelists here is the presidency, and I think we've tapped into this a little bit, but we'll go a little deeper. So is the presidency increasingly symbolic when it comes to intelligence agencies and their power, regardless of who is occupying the office? So, we see the intelligence agencies, our presidents, they come in and out every 4 to 8 years. But the intelligence agencies are there, right? And they continue to exist. And so, what are your guys' thoughts on the intelligence communities and the power that they're wielding, and how that can impact the presidency and current events?
I'll say just one. It was a quip at NSA when I was there as a senior executive. But you would hear it from those who had been there a long time, and it ascended to the highest levels. And this is how they view the presidency. Presidents come and go, but we're still here. And they would even say directors come and go, but we're still here. So there is sort of the administrative state side of national security that is incredibly persistent. And if there's anything that drives them bureaucratically, is the need to survive as an institution. So you tend to defend yourself against anybody, whether it's within or without, whether it's Congress or even the other parts of the executive, even up to and including the president. You want to protect your turf.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, Coleen, you mentioned this, and we've heard John Kiriakou talk about this before, about how the agencies actually really struggled to communicate with one another. I think John said that the FBI and the CIA, they didn't even have ways to send information to one another for an incredibly long time. Coleen, do you have any insights on the division between the intel agencies?
Well, the CIA actually had FBI agents assigned to their counterterrorism center who tried to send the memo to the FBI. There were ways. Our office in Minnesota called the CIA Counterterrorism Center seeking information on this connection between the Chechen terrorists and Osama bin Laden. So there were ways. Now, that they were stopped. They were deliberately stopped from sharing information. The two agents that know about this, that knew the two hijackers came into California, were deliberately stopped from telling the truth to the official inquiries afterwards. It's frankly a lot worse than people can imagine, I think. And a lot of this is because of the agendas, the pre-existing agendas. Yes, there's a lot of continuity, but also I would say the one thing different between Trump's first term and now, and this is a big difference, is that his first term, he had a lot of those former Clappers and Brennans who had risen up through the deep state, through their agencies. This new term, he's appointed all of the people that he thought, for one reason, loyalty. So people like Kash Patel and people like Bondi and all the rest, these are not they are not people that came up through the career path through the deep state. And he learned a lesson. If I don't have loyalists, they will work behind my back, like Brennan, like Pompeo, like all of them, Bolton, all of them. I think despite his efforts, he still has a couple of them in there that are manipulating him. So, you talk about the president being all powerful. I don't know, Rubio and Radcliffe, the CIA director. I think a lot of these people have Trump a little bit twisted around, and he knows there's a big agenda here. That's my opinion.
And what is the big agenda, Coleen? And with your expertise,
you go back to the PNAC. It's to maintain that unilateral full spectrum dominance and that's actually now admitted. Like with Greenland, what Brzezinski wrote, the global chessboard and how to control the world through using, by the way, terrorist proxy forces. That was one of the ways, but that whole thing was a little more murky. It wasn't admitted. Trump, I will give him credit. He is coming out and telling the American people, we gotta take over Greenland. We took over Venezuela. We're gonna attack Iran. He's telling the truth about these things. And it's a brutal truth, but he's also saying, and by the way, no laws will stop us. No laws, no international law, nothing. So that's, and you know what? I don't think this is necessarily coming from Trump's, even though I do think that first term turned him into a monster. I think a lot of it is coming from prior thinking, the Rubio, the Radcliffes that have had this agenda for a long time.
Now, Ray, you were very much involved in understanding the Russians, right? And understanding how how international politics work, right? So what are you seeing from the international community? What's the international reaction to what's going on in this political landscape we have right now?
Well, in a word, in answer to your question, they see a delusional narcissist in power in Washington. Nothing could be more dangerous. And so if you want to ask why Putin sits back and takes all these indignities and provocations and even attempts on his own residents, that's the answer. Putin is smart enough to know that the 25 years that he spent building up Russia to what it is now can be wasted in one flash if Trump does something really stupid. So that's my answer to that. In that sense, it's really all up to Trump, and Putin is winning in Ukraine. He'd like to have a more decent relationship. Why? Because he likes Trump? I don't think so. I don't know if even Melania likes Trump, but that's beside the point. No, because he wants to avoid anything that could lead to nuclear war. And this guy is irascible, unpredictable, mercurial, just all the things that that Putin never wants in the president of the United States. And that is precisely why the notion that Putin would favor Trump over even Hillary Clinton was always crazy for me. The Russians always prefer to have somebody predictable, and however damagingly predictable Hillary was, at least she wasn't Trump. So I would like to just say a word about covert action for reasons of why we meet here.
Yes, feel free.
Yeah, I go back a ways, and some of your people will remember that there was the Bay of Pigs operation led by the CIA in 1961, right after John Kennedy became president. Now, Kennedy didn't like the smell of this, but he was told that Eisenhower approved it. And the big thing Kennedy said is, look, this doesn't seem like you're going to succeed, but all right, try it. But I will not commit U.S. military forces to rescue you if you're caught on the beach or if you need help. No U.S. military forces. You got that? Oh, yeah, all right, got that. Oh, what happened? We know they got caught on the beach. And Kennedy adhered to his commitment not to introduce U.S. forces. Now, that didn't go down well with Allen Dulles, who was the head of the CIA at the time and who ran this operation. And we know what he expected. And because we have the coffee-stained notes from his desk after he died, and it said, ha, this young Kennedy, this upstart, when push comes to shove, if we're in danger on the beach, there is no way that he will be able to avoid committing U.S. forces to save the Enterprise. literal that's what the note said, right? The enterprise being the overthrow of Castro. Now, what happened next is Kennedy was just appalled at how he'd been taken in, and he asked the historian, his name was Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who was one of the Kennedys. He said, "Look, can you take 2 months off from writing history, and could you tell me why the hell it is that Alan Dulles kept telling me that Castro is going to fall, and that, and instead he goes to the beach and he mans one of these. Can you tell me why the CIA got it so wrong?" Now we have Schlesinger's memo. It was just released last year. It's dated June 30th, 1961. Bay of Pigs was in April. This was June 30th, 1961. Now, what do you say? Schlesinger says, and I'll read for this so you'll know that I'm not making it up. The trouble with the Cuban operation was that the Cuban operation evaded any systematic intelligence analysis. Get this, folks. The intelligence branch, called the DDI, Deputy Director for Intelligence, in which I served, the DDI of the CIA was never informed of the existence of the Cuban operation. Never informed, much less asked for its appraisal of whether Castro would fall when these ragtag guys left on the beach. That's Schlesinger reporting back less than 2 months after the operation. Now, so Dulles did cut the analysis off, and here you have the bifurcation of the CIA, which is all important. If the analysis people are involved, you get the operatives going off half-cocked. Can we do this? Of course we can. And they lie, and Dulles disdained JFK. Okay. Now, what else? Let me just read one other portion of the Schlesinger thing. It was sort of in a footnote because he didn't want to advertise this, right? He's talking about covert action and things like torture. Folks, we're talking more than 5 decades ago. That's one benefit of being so old. I remember these things, but now we have the text. Okay, here's Schlesinger. Now, the people in Washington that work for the CIA are really high quality people, but the men attracted to field jobs are sometimes very tough and even driven by desires of their own and not necessarily in sympathy with the operation. Such actions like Operation 40 in Miami, well, CIA agents reported the Cubans in how to torture people. Oh, and these torture techniques were administered to 16 Democratic Cubans in Miami just this last February. All this suggests that things go on under CIA sponsorship, with which CIA in Washington may be only thinly acquainted. I'll fast forward, folks. Fast forward. Truman, exactly 1 month after JFK was killed. I think the evidence is very strong that the CIA was the prime mover here. Truman said 1 month later in an op-ed in the Washington Post, the worst thing the CIA can do is give the president misleading information which prompts him to embark on very risky adventures that have no basis in fact. Truman, okay? Truman, who established the CIA to have one place he could go to get the truth, not so much to do operations. So, okay, so five decades later, here I am watching the Senate approve the nomination of Bloody Gina, the sort of the epithet people at CIA use, Gina Haspel, known to have been leading the waterboarding and other torture in the first USA, actually first CIA web black site, so to speak, in Thailand. Everyone, it was in the press, and they were gonna nominate her. And I looked at those folks, and those folks worked with me, and those folks I had good relations with, and most of them had been honest. But if you get in things like covering up 9/11, if you get in things like teaching Cubans to torture one another, okay, well, your principles erode. So I'm just going to finish here by saying that I'm glad that I got creamed by the Capitol Police and had to stay in jail for a while. But I had to shout out and say, look, you guys are arranging a charade here. You know, and she won't answer the question. You say executive session. We all know that she led the first waterboarding and reported in detail on it, and then destroyed the record. So all I'm saying here is that you have two CIAs. This is really important. Now, has Trump consulted the analysts in the CIA before doing what he's doing in Venezuela? I don't think so. How about before what he's talking in Greenland? No, I don't think. How about Iran and the Israeli? No, I don't think so. Or the worst would be, of course, that people like Gina Haspel and the analysts have been thoroughly corrupted. And I'd suggest there is some hope still. We'd like to finish on a note of hope. And the hope is that in March of last year, so 10 months ago, Gina Haspel blessed what they call a threat assessment, the annual one, to Congress, saying Iran was not working on a nuclear weapon and had stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003. Now, that was a most unwelcome judgment. It came in 2007 in a national intelligence estimate, okay? It was unanimous, it was expressed with high confidence, and it prevented a war, the war that Bush and Cheney wanted to launch before they left office in the following year, 2008. So what I'm saying is that there's really a market for honest analysts. And maybe one reason that Tulsi was cut out of these other decisions was because she would have told the truth. So I'm back and forth as to whether she would resign. I think maybe there's a chance she could do some good again. So I think she should hang around. But this bifurcation, operations and intelligence, has to be addressed. Never has been. And the operations people, of course, get all the money, all the funding, and all the attention from the president. I'll quit there. Thanks for your patience.
Well, these are incredible insights, Ray, and I think you really highlighted and were able to articulate the history, the depth. I mean, you just covered 50 years and were able to summarize it in, less than 10 minutes. So thank you so much for those insights. Coleen, I want to go to you because you are, I don't want to, disclose too much, but you are in a location right now and you were sharing with us before we got on to this webinar that it looks like it looks like you're in a war zone right now. And I want to kind of bring it into what is happening here in America. There's lots of tensions growing. There's talks about civil war. There's actually historians that look at geopolitics and the history, and they are forecasting civil war within America. And so I kind of want to talk about some of these hot button moments and how the intel agencies might be in on it in some way. I don't know. What give us a breakdown, Coleen, because I know you're wanting to lean into that, and we would love to hear your insights.
Before the situation in Minnesota is a war zone, in my opinion. When Renee Good was shot, I said it was the Kent State moment in Vietnam. And if you look at the regime change operations through economic leverage, economic sanctions and power, whatever, and it's not just the CIA's behind a lot of them, most of this, but the National Endowment for Democracy and these other NGOs that are the fronts for CIA. One of the modus operandi that they use. They start with a lot of information warfare, i.e. Russiagate, calling the Russians all kinds of names and Putin, etc. So you demonize a population that is the target. Look at what they demonize Venezuela. They're narco-terrorists. In Minnesota, Trump went out today and called the Somalis all kinds of names. I mean, Minnesota's full of Somalis. They don't have any money. They shouldn't be here. They're worthless. Basically, they're worthless. They're not even human. Now, he said this today, and he's been saying it. The mass media has run with the fact that we have terrible Somali fraud in Minnesota, etc. So it's not just the Somalis. They've called the protesters in Minnesota. Let's see what the first titles, the radical left, that was the least worst term. We are domestic terrorists. So if you even try to go to the scene of an ICE raid and do George Floyd was murdered. And if there had not been the people taking the video with their cameras, the police officer probably would have gotten off, but there was video. So of course people know. Yesterday, they drug a elderly man from Laos out of the house in his underwear in 20 below zero weather. They did hand him a blanket, and he was a U.S. citizen. He wasn't even an immigrant. I guess he was a naturalized years ago or something. So the reason we know that, people were there. It's really a sad thing to watch. It made national news to watch this old man being carried out in freezing weather. So no, Trump demonizes the people taking the video as terrorists, domestic terrorists. And here's the other term that was just used a day ago. And the reason this term is important, he called Minnesota insurrectionists. He's launched an investigation of the Minnesota governor, the Minnesota attorney general, the two mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Why? They're insurrectionists. They are, and the reason that's important is because that old law, the Insurrection Act of 1807, will allow him to send, he's got 1,500 troops in Alaska. They thought, okay, Minnesota's cold, so we'll get the Alaskan soldiers who are used to the cold, and they're all on standby to come here. When I say it's a war zone, remember what happened in Syria, where we had funded one side and they were fighting another side. The CIA had funded one side, the other side. The same thing is happening here because we have local police and state police. By the way, a tiny fraction of the federal. There's 3,000 ICE, and I think it's going up to 4,000. And so there's all these different, guess what? They all in theory have jurisdiction. The police have jurisdiction. Trump said, not Trump, Stephen Miller, the top, I should have named him along with Rubio. He's one of the guys running the show in Washington right now, Stephen Miller. So whatever he says is very important. He's on the National Security Advisor. He's like, we're right under Rubio. He said, I think he's also the one who said insurrection, but he said that, now I'm losing my train here of thought, what he came out with, but it's incredible in terms of calling the Minnesota, demonizing. Okay, I'm going to go on to my next point. What's the next step after demonizing the foreign population? The next step is usually economic sanctions. So they have withdrawn the federal money that goes to Minnesota for Medicaid, for all of these things. That's 1/3 of Minnesota budget right now. You don't think there's a war on Minnesota? Oh my gosh. And so their things are closing, the businesses are closing, even schools now are not entirely closed, but they're telling kids, as during COVID, not to come to school. They can learn distance. Okay, the last in the NED and the CIA, the last step of fomenting this complete thing is a shot, Maidan Square. So then a shot is fired, and all of a sudden you can claim, oh no, it was the domestic protester in her car and she was whatever. So literally, if you look at the comparison between international, what the United States does internationally, they have now turned that on domestic citizens. I know people don't want to know, people in other states, oh, it won't happen here. Minnesota doesn't even have an illegal immigration problem. I mean, you would never know this from the news. The highest levels of immigrants are in Texas and Florida that are Trump's base. We have like 9% or something. It's a very thin, skinny amount. So it's all pretextual. And it's really kind of scary to be living here. And of course, speaking out, all the whistleblowers, we had 6 of our U.S. attorneys. These were our professional career people. I was actually surprised. They walked out. We had 6 of our career professionals. One was the former acting U.S. attorney himself, and they were prosecuting Somalian fraud. And a few days ago, they said, we're ordered not to investigate the shooting, but to investigate the partner of the victim. And they walked out of the office. Literally, this is unprecedented. And, so anyway, it's quite the war zone.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's incredibly concerning for you as well as the rest of the country. Jeremy, can we hop over to you real quick, and can you provide us some historical context when we start to see these tensions rising on the grounds here? I think let's try to, give some insights into our audience. How do the people persevere in dark times? That's my question for you, Jeremy, through the historical lens.
Well, I don't know if I have a specific answer to that. Historically, well, it relates to my point of political economy. Obviously, Trump's and the GOP strategy is to diffuse, any progressive movement into this anti-immigrant hatred, and it's reaching very dangerous levels as she's describing. I think there's also, a strategy of tension maybe at play for a long time, where the ruling class, is playing a game of divide and conquer, and you have a lot of these social movement that have been infiltrated, and they're provocateurs, and we did a study on the January 6th. And on one hand, was a symptom of the kind of ascendant fascistic movement. On the other hand, you also had a lot of manipulation by the FBI that was exposed. And I think they want the strategy of tension. Is a good book by Daniel Ganser I can recommend, called NATO's Secret Armies. And yeah, he's talking about Europe and other places in the Cold War. But as Coleen was saying, these strategies are increasingly being used domestically by this ruling oligarchy that has lost legitimacy among a large sector of the population. And that's why Trump has used these manipulation techniques I was describing, because a lot of the public is weary of the intelligence agency, the growth of these huge federal bureaucracies, surveillance, police state. I mean, it's antithetical to American constitutional principles, as Thomas was pointing out, to American values on civil liberties, which is very deeply rooted in the country's history. So they use all kinds of tricks of propaganda, but also the strategy of tension, divide and rule. And the Ganser book shows how it played out in Europe, and they actually staged, they infiltrated left-wing movements in Europe, like in Italy, and they actually staged terrorist acts. It came out in an Italian parliamentary investigation that Ganser discusses how they carried out a terrorist act. This was NATO secret army, and I think the CIA had involvement in an Italian intelligence service, bombed the railway station, planted explosives in the home of a left-wing journalist, and it was designed to discredit the left and also create a state of fear. What they want is the public to suspend rational judgment when you have these cataclysmic events and when you have growing unrest and civil conflict and violence. The public descends into a state of panic and fear, and then they're willing to sign away their civil liberties evermore. They're not thinking rationally. And that was the mindset after 9/11, and that's why many people are suspicious of 9/11. I investigated the Oklahoma City bombing, and that was clearly there was corruption involved in that. There were two bombs, not one. There was manipulation by the intelligence service. Timothy McVeigh was set up as a patsy. There's very, very strong evidence of that. And I think, and right after, less than 6 months later, Bill Clinton signed into legislation a preview of the USA Patriot Act that was totally unpopular before. It could never pass Congress before the Oklahoma City bombing, but now the public was in fear of terrorism. So that may be what behind you may have intelligence agencies who are manipulating events on the ground on all sides to create a state of emergency, and that's how they can continue to ratchet up these police state measures, and it gets worse and worse, and democracy is eroded. So I think the public should be wary of that. And also, it's important to expose the role of espion provocateur in social movements, whether of the right or the left, because that is part, I think, of a strategy of tension. And if that is exposed, then the public could stand back against that. And what we need is a resurgence of a genuinely progressive political movement that will fight for the thing the traditional left fought for, to rein in Wall Street, rein in big money in politics, tax the wealthy, better social programs, rein in the military budget. That's what progressives have to focus on. And when they're not thinking rationally, they end up supporting. And that's how they do it to support war. You know, you had asked about propaganda, whether events like 9/11 or the Russiagate, they get the public not to think rationally. They either demonize an enemy constantly. The propaganda has to be ceaseless. What we've seen with the anti-Russia propaganda is it's been ceaseless for 10 years, and it's targeted liberal, especially, and left-wing outlets, and that's why they're so vicious toward dissenters, because they can't tolerate any dissent. Anybody who punctures the false narrative they present about Putin, that Ray pointed out to, they can't have that, because then the public starts to see that, oh, Russia's not so bad, and if they think rationally, I mean, it's rational for the U.S. and Russian to have good relations, to cooperate economically. It's key to world peace. And it's key to not having to invest so much money in the arms race. I mean, rationally, we'd rather spend much more money on education, on healthcare, on quality of life than on nuclear weapons and an arms
Absolutely.
race. So you have to, use this propaganda, demonize the enemy, or the other facet is to provoke conflicts and create a state of crisis and panic, so people aren't thinking rationally, and then they will sign away their civil liberties and support these skewed public policy that we've been seeing over generations now, and that are getting worse and worse, as was described by
Yeah.
Drake and others.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You know, Thomas, I want to move to you. And when I think about the whistleblowers out there and the people that, in the post 9/11 world, right, that stood up and were blowing the whistle saying, we need our America back, right? And I'm thinking about how, thinking about you and the people that are on the front lines. And it appears that we're about to see a lot more Thomas Drakes out there, right? A lot more people standing up and essentially being crushed by this machine. So what would you say for people who do have that bravery in their hearts, and do have a love for their country and a love for their people? I mean, how would you suggest we carry ourselves in a crumbling empire? I mean, in speaking up for truth and also protecting ourselves. I mean, from your lived experience, what are some suggestions you could give to all of us in these dark times?
Yeah, it reminds me of the 1930s I spent a number of years listening in on the Warsaw Pact, and in particular, the East Germany. But the Weimar Republic that preceded the Third Reich, to me is rhymed. Is where history rhymes, and it's quite prescient and alarmingly parallel to what's happening in America today. And there is an open question. So the open question is there enough of a remnant of Americans to reverse the slide into full-on authoritarianism? It is clear that those in power want to maintain control or increase control through fear and silence and indifference and denial, and that does, in fact, keep many from acting. Given what's happening in Minneapolis, I mean, it does give me hope to see everyday Americans, many of them who've never protested before, coming out in droves, because they realize what's at stake. And it's now very personal, because you literally have, men in masks, although there are some women, interestingly enough, as well, but walking around and just grabbing and taking and stopping, and for no particular reason, it seems, other than, hey, they just can, right? I have the power. Who's going to stop me? And if you try to stop me or protest, then you're obstructing, quote unquote, operations. So we do have a paradox here. We have a paradox that includes the reality of people I'm certainly aware of, and certainly in my own experience, that do stand up. And these are people that don't usually seek power for power's sake, while in fact many good people, and I put good, right, good in quotes, in government, are often isolated and pushed out. So the concern I have is the window closing? Meaning, how much longer, how much more is taken away before you can't reverse the slide? And remember, all empires end up in the dustbins of history. There was an interesting book written by Sinclair Lewis some decades ago, in the mid-30s, that it can't happen here. What I'm seeing now, which I find even more alarming, is you're seeing this combination of the oligarchs. Remember, we talked earlier about the corporate link. This even goes back to the Nazi regime. Much of what happened under Hitler would not have occurred without the cooperation and the support of large corporations. We're seeing the emergence of a technocratic, and I'm going to say it, neo-fascist state regime. Combine that with the narcissism and the personality cult of Trump and his confederates. I'm using the word confederates deliberately. And I have to say it, but this is where it gets really uncomfortable for some people. What I'm increasingly viewing as a very virulent and decidedly non-Christian form of white racist nationalism, all coming together and it's all being justified under emergency conditions. So this means that even within the United States, we have a number of event horizons that we're facing, and they're not all pleasant. I personally am shifting more and more to an indications and warning posture as an unblinking eyewitness on history, while now finding myself, as we're seeing on front pages now, people having to maintain higher levels of vigilance and discernment. But I think there is a wake up America. I mean, the polarization, it doesn't take long. There are some who are saying, I mean, it's interesting, how quickly can even nominal, say America is democratic, a constitutional republic, how quickly can it descend into authoritarianism? If you look in the post 9/11 world, I'd say it's been greatly increased as all these emergency powers are basically becoming normalized and get handed down to the next administration. And do you think they want to give up that power? No. That's why you can see the clamping down that's occurring to try to shut people up that still remain, and those people in government are saying, hey, this isn't right. And they don't want, being exposed to the light of day. So what do? You try to shut the door on that. This is where understanding history actually can provide, I think, insights as well as some tools for people to navigate the current challenges. But we're experiencing an increasingly extra constitutional and law-free environment. And once you get into this law-free space, as we're seeing on the streets in Minnesota, particularly, and then you remember they're going to the cities. Remember, there are going elsewhere, but you're seeing in the news, you're seeing this in the cities primarily. And then you back it all up with this might makes right mentality. That creates a very combustible, and they're looking for an excuse. I mean, I'd be curious what Coleen thinks, because he's been wanting to invoke the Insurrection Act against what if easily starts calling and demonizing as insurrectionists. He wants to do that. He really wants to. Now, if you do that, guess what? You're just one line away from martial law.
Coleen, do you have a response to that?
Well, I agree. Totally agree with Tom on that. Some of the good things out there, besides the people that are, well, I don't know what you want to call them, are obeying the law. That's what they are doing. They're obeying the law. I've never liked the term civil liberties. The freedom of press is not a luxury. It's not like ice cream on a pie. It's the law. And the reason freedom of press is integral. We've got to have freedom of press. If they don't give the information, this was what Edward Snowden, but you can't have a democracy. You can't have anything. So it's not really, I've never liked that term, civil liberties, like it's something additional. It's the law itself. And if you now say we can't have anyone covering events, and I did remember what Stephen Miller said. Stephen Miller said a day ago in his tweet that the local police, the state police in Minnesota, need to surrender. That was his quote. Police, and no, we're a state that has jurisdiction over murder. We had six U.S. attorneys walking out because they couldn't even investigate an outright murder. And our police, that's another good thing. Some police officers are doing the right thing. Our local, they are a small, tiny number. One thing that I think would be good to happen is if we got more lawyers, more civil lawyers throughout the country sent here. Trump is sending 25 military JAG attorneys to pick up the slack from the 6, and they will be immigration officers. I've been following some of the cases. They've had to release, if you get beat up, they don't give you an apology, and if you get beat up and put in jail wrongly. One guy was a combat vet. He was 8 hours detained after he was thrown to the ground and beat up. Literally, he needs a lawyer because under the law, under the 4th Amendment, you can sue the government. That should be happening. I don't think, nobody has money. As Tom knows, lawyers cost a lot of money. And, I went to law school, but I'm not licensed in Minnesota. And we need more people to come in. Trump's sending lawyers here to try to skew this, to whatever. We need people on the side because there's a lot of people being beat up. Their cars rammed, their windshields broken. They're American citizens. They definitely have a cause of action. And I think as much as people dismiss the law, they'll say, oh, those judges, they're appointed by Trump. Oh, they're going to be biased and whatever. I agree with that. I've never agreed with that because when a judge gets that full freedom, when they're appointed for life, they sometimes get critical thinking. They don't have to be, whatever. And so there are judges that turn against the president who appointed them. I've even seen some of the judges appointed by Trump who have now released people that have been put into detention, wrongly put into detention. So anyway, that's one of the things I think that should happen, and it would be a hopeful thing if we can. Ellison is suing. Our attorney general is trying to sue the feds. Now the feds, Trump people called it frivolous, and that they will try to disbar Ellison. If you say frivolous, that's a term of art. If you say it's frivolous, they can bring things, but we need more good attorneys bringing lawsuits, along with all the people out there who are trying to film and trying to keep the government accountable.
Absolutely. That's a brilliant strategy there. Okay, well, Ray, I want to hear your insights here into this discussion, and then we will wrap up this panel discussion and get into questions from the audience. So, Ray, you got the mic.
Thank you. We are celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday. And I think that the one thing that he said in the letter from the Birmingham City Jail, which is a masterpiece of American literature, bears exactly on what CovertAction Magazine is doing and what we've been trying to do tonight. Now, the word has been used a couple of times now by several. Exposure. Expose, okay? That, I think, is our job. We have to expose what's going on and make sure that despite all the limitations of our media, that our fellow citizens get to know what's going on. This is what Dr. King said. It's not often quoted, but I used it in every course that I taught, whether it was relevant to the course or not. Here it is. He compared injustice with a boil, okay? Now, when I was an adolescent, I had boils. And at this point, Medea Benjamin would say, all right, Ray, too much sharing, too much sharing. You don't have to describe what a boil is, right? But they're really nasty, okay? Dr. King said, like a boil that can never be cured unless it is opened up with all the pus-flowing effluence its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion, so too injustice must be exposed with all the friction that its exposure creates to that same light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. And so my hat's off to CovertAction Magazine and for all those of us who are trying to speak out and who are not limiting ourselves by saying, oh my, nobody could hear us. Well, we have to keep trying. I think good will prevail in the end. That's my hope. I may not be around to see it, but good people are in the fray. I see a lot of people a lot younger than I am here. Actually, I guess everybody's younger than I am here. And my hope is that we'll meet the task and become the kinds of winter soldiers that Thomas Paine spoke of so many years ago.
Beautiful closing thoughts. Thank you so much. And there's this quote, I don't know who said it, but every generation has its own evil that it needs to face, right? And evil doesn't die, but it is up to every generation to cut it back so it doesn't overgrow, right? So we all have a responsibility to shine the light and pop those boils, okay? Thank you so much for your insights. Okay, so I see we have a few hands. I'm going to open this up to the audience now. Thank you guys so much. Let me see here. I see Chip. Chip has a question. Go ahead, come up off of mute and share your insights with us.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, let me first say what a privilege it is to be listening to all the speakers, but in particular, Mr. Drake, I want to express my profound admiration for what you had to endure over and above what almost anybody else has had to, save perhaps John Kiriakou. So thank you for your courage and your patriotism. But in addition, in your comments, you led into what I've been thinking about for quite some time. I've been beating this horse for a while. It's my opinion that the root cause of all of the ills that we've been describing tonight is the fact, as Jeremy, I think, will attest, that we're coming to the end of an empire cycle. And all of the things that are going on collectively, I would describe with one word, and that's chaos. So, as disappointed as I am in what I see happening in the country, I'm not so much surprised, if you see what I mean. What I think is needed, I was really glad to hear Mr. Drake speak, I think, directly to what I'm about to say. The American people have the capacity to collectively join arms. I've been really encouraged by the both sides' response to what's happening in Palestine, to the Epstein issue, as maudlin as that one is, to see collective efforts, people coming together. And I'm hopeful I wrote a paper, Jeremy. I don't know if you ever got it. I sent it to John a couple of years ago. It was entitled Missing the Forest for the Trees. And what it boiled down to was I compared the history of the United States since the 17th century to empires since Babylon and how all of the parallels are happening today. There are two steps to solving any problem. The first one is acceptance. The problem exists. This is an intellectual exercise, and as such is not quite so difficult. But the second one is really hard. It's called acceptance, and that's the emotional component. And what I have been trying to put forth in these fora, the few that I've been able to attend, is to attempt to point out that while all of the discrete individual issues that we described tonight and on, they're symptoms, they're not causal. And if we can't, there's a limited amount of political capital in the world. So if you're paying attention to issues A, B, and C, you don't have so much energy for issues D, E, and F, or something like that. And the primary issue today, from my point of view, is the American people need to be brought together to recognize that we're in a process it's unstoppable. The empire will go away, but we have an option for it to go quietly or to hit the ground hard. Anyway, that's my 2 cents, and I hope I was clear in trying to express myself. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chip. Great insights, and hopefully we can dig up that article that you wrote. Sounds really fascinating, and get it up on our website here.
Well,
Ron.
may I just say that
Yes.
it's a 35-page paper, and so I don't know, Jeremy, if you ever got it, but I don't know. It wasn't publishable in that form. I've been trying to boil it down to something publishable, but I have the last
Reach
few
out
years
to
have been
Jeremy
really
on the
crazy.
back end. Yeah, reach out to
Right.
Jeremy on the back end,
Definitely,
Chip,
yeah.
and we'll
I
get
keep
you
making
to it.
excuses to Jeremy for not writing articles, and I'm sorry about that, but it's just
Yeah,
been,
keep
I
writing
have an
faster.
acronym here that I call it batshit stupid crazy. It's been that way for 2 years running, and I just haven't been able to get it together to put together an article which is entitled Too Many Holes in the Dike, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I'll get to it as soon as I possibly can, Jeremy, but things are really, really nuts around here right now. Thank you.
Well, take your time, Chip. We're here for you when you're ready. Thank you so much for your insights. Ron, hop on in. How are you this evening? Welcome.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Well, kind of following on Chip's statement, I think the analysis of this end of an empire is on the mark. I think often we describe and study these kinds of things, and we don't actually look clearly at the also the vulnerabilities that kind of system has. And it's ironic that in the 250th anniversary here of the United States actually forming in the fight against that empire, we now have kind of lost our way and we have to refine it. So a return to control of our own credit, a national banking system made out of the Federal Reserve, for example, it's exactly this that is forming around the world with the BRICS and the global South and such. So we have an alliance there that the American people can join and actually put this derivative bubble through a Chapter 11, and as nations cooperate building out of this with physical economy. And I put a note in the chat, which is a conference that was just held that actually has pulled together a growing catalyst, which has got to continue to build to actually create a new security and strategic architecture to pull that off. Now, I'm with the Schiller Institute. The founder of that is the wife of Lyndon LaRouche. And I think in a lot of things that people have laid out here tonight and the kind of targeting and narratives, there's another individual people should actually get to the bottom of and actually study a bit, because we can actually put 5, 6, 7, $20 trillion in the physical economy, opening up, 1.5, 1.6 billion productive jobs. So there's an interest for everyone. So I want to just call attention to that. And then the second thing we're involved with is really trying to take this generation of youth that are born after 9/11 and use the anniversary here to actually educate that generation, but first also ourselves, coming back to a self-consciousness of these ideas and principles. And I just wanted to throw out to the panelists, and especially, Mr. Drake, what do you think about that kind of clear education that's got to be done on this generation, but coming back to these principles of credit, where our own generation, our own people, our own citizens begin to see a way out, and not just the terror where we see fascism and all those footprints, but actually a clear sense that we can, in a piece of emergency legislation paralleling other nations, freeze that mountain of paper, putting back Glass-Steagall in place, and earmarking the credit, just removing them from a control of credit, and create the movement that forces politicians to pick that up, whether they will or not. But the movement itself, like a king movement, dominating the political movement, as opposed to waiting for parties to bring somebody to us. So I'd
Thomas,
like to
do
throw,
you have a response to that?
They're not going to give up without a fight, because there's a lot to lose if you're in the elites category. So
well, I'm not
if you hold
saying
the
what
if,
they, what
if you
they
hold
have
the
to give
reins
up.
of
I'm
yeah,
sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, let's answer.
no, there's where do they benefit, right? They benefit by holding power on multiple sectors of across society in the world, and in particularly the economy. And there are those forces who are looking for the equivalent of pushing for a one world government as a
I
way to
agree,
centralize all this.
but we're not chopped liver, as they say. We have the policies and the principles of the Constitution to put it through a bankruptcy and sovereignly run policy. Now the question is, how do you build the power to do that? And that's the grassroots. That's why I'm asking people to look at that
Well,
particular
the first time we encountered that, even though it was not it went through the Arctic Federation, then we turned into the Constitution. We had a violent revolution against King George III.
All right.
So, given the principles, what Ray mentioned with MLK Jr., is there a higher law to say that without getting into what's behind that? Is there a higher law? I have to admit, I'm a bit cynical these days when it comes to the ability of human beings to govern themselves, period, across the board.
Well, then we'll probably end up with that thermonuclear war, that's because we're letting other forces with no options. So if we don't isolate the crazies,
Yeah,
then
then we got to start asking deeper questions about why are we even here? But that's a whole nother conversation.
no, we
Yeah,
are here.
thank you so much,
Anyway,
Ron. Yeah, no, I really appreciate the insights, and we'll definitely be taking a look at that information that you shared with us. Much appreciated. So we only have 3 minutes, and we have 24 questions, guys. Oh gosh, I don't know if we're gonna get through here. So I'm gonna let's see. We have from Samir. After decades of deep U.S. political entanglement with the Zionist project, is there any realistic scenario in which American governance and foreign policy can break free from entrenched special interest influence and move towards a more principled, law-based approach to Palestine and the region? So that's a question about Palestine. Anyone have insights to that?
As long as Israel's a secular state, it's going to be incredibly challenging, but they'll find themselves increasingly isolated.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna just do one more here, and then we're gonna close it out, guys. Oh, there's lots of excellent speakers. Thank you guys for these comments here. Let's see. Oh, okay. Someone said, not sure the intelligence agencies can be reformed. Dismantling completely may be in order. Ray, what are your thoughts on that one? You think we can dismantle the CIA in this lifetime? What do you think? Oh, you're on mute. Bottom left.
I've grappled with that for years. And for a while, I used to say, well, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The bathwater, in my view, are these people that Schlesinger described involved in torture back 5 decades ago and misleading the president into a major confrontation with Cuba. The baby are the people who continue to tell Tulsi Gabbard, and this I did prevent a war back in 2007, 2008. That Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon, has not been since 2003, and we would know it right away if they were. So, to the degree there are honest people in the CIA, well, maybe we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe we should put the bathwater at the Pentagon where it belongs, and let the analysis people do their job without being tainted or prejudiced by what the operations people are doing. That would be my comment on that.
Much appreciated. Let's see if I can get one more in here. Promethean Action on X, former collaborators, great information. Oh gosh, it's just a recommendation for Lyndon LaRoche. I hope I'm saying that. Thank you for your recommendation, Renee. Well, with that, I just want to give a huge thanks and gratitude on behalf of Covert Action Magazine for all of you who joined us this evening, and an incredibly special guest to our guest speakers here. Your insights, your work, your dedication to this country and our nation is, we are deeply grateful to you guys and all that you've done here. So for everyone out there, go pop those boils, okay? We all got a boil to pop. Figure out which one it is and go pop it, okay? Shine the light, and we appreciate you guys. And until next time, thank you so much for joining us on our Covert Action Magazine webinar. Until next time, guys, thank you all so much.